It made me take a step back from my interpretive model and to be able to say, okay, let me just assume for the sake of argument that this interpretive model is not the one that best explains these data points. This is what makes me, one of the things that makes me dislike apologetics so much is that he had apologetics. Now, all the apologists that are watching this are going, yes, right? Yeah.
You snatched one from the fire.
Yeah, we did it. Like, now we're emboldened. And that, as simple as that sounds, was so powerful to me.
Well, this is a treat for me. I've been looking forward to this for just about a year now, ever since I stumbled across a deconversion video of a gentleman, a doctor, a scholar, if you will.
If you will. Just do this and you're safe, you know what I mean?
Dr. Josh. About a year ago, I had stumbled across your deconversion video, and everything inside me lit up. And I just knew, I said, this is somebody I need to speak to. And you were so gracious when we finally did talk. I'll get into all that. But for those who are not familiar, my guest today is Dr. Joshua Bowen. He is the author of, please don't turn this off when I say the names of these books. I quoted you one time in my book.
Yeah.
I wanted to quote you so much more, but I felt like the people I was trying to reach,
yes,
when they saw the title of the book I was quoting, they'd be like, "Oh, they're reading this crap." I won't even say the name of the book yet. I mean, I'm not even saying. I won't say the name. I'll draw the viewer in a little more, then I'll give them the name of the books. But Dr. Josh is a Ph.D. trained Assyriologist. And is it minor in Hebrew language or?
Yeah, so the program up at Hopkins had, there are essentially like four main parts to the department. And one was Hebrew Bible, one was seriology, one was archaeology, and one was Egyptology. And I spent the majority of my time in Assyriology, a little bit less than that in Hebrew Bible, and a little bit less than that in archaeology. And I didn't really get much into Egyptology because I'm not smart enough to do Egyptology. Let's just be honest. You know what I mean? Let's be honest.
So one thing you'll learn, and I hope appreciate from Dr. Josh, I need to learn this from Dr. Josh. Dr. Josh is quick to say, that's not my area of expertise. Even sometimes when it is in his wheelhouse, he'll defer, your humility and I guess your practicality of, here's what we can confidently say. And so here's what I'm going to say. And here's what I can say, maybe not as confidently as someone else. I just appreciate that because it's such a measured approach. But for the listener, viewer, what does it mean to have a PhD in Assyriology? Like, what did you study and why even?
Yeah. So, when I started my bachelor's degree, I was a fundamentalist evangelical. And so I went to Liberty University, studied religion there. I got my bachelor's of science, and then started at a seminary that is now part of Lancaster Bible College.
Where I graduated from.
Yeah. It used to be called Capital Bible Seminary and Washington Bible College. They're on the same campus. And again, fundamentalist evangelical school. And I got a master's of theology there. So a 6-year, 126 semester hour graduate degree. It was the biggest one they had. And so I took 6 years of Koine Greek. Everybody had to, and took all the theology courses and took all the the standard stuff. But
I'm sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick. Why were you doing that? Why were you pursuing these Christian education degrees?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a missionary or a pastor really since I got saved when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
So, everything that I did, even when I joined the Air Force when I was 17, and as soon as I got to my first duty station, it was okay. Go get a 3x5 whiteboard and an easel, and got my KJV Bible that's all marked up. And I'm sitting there I remember sitting in this day room every Wednesday at 7 p.m. And I'd spread the word that I was going to do this Bible study. And I would just sit in there by myself for an hour. And I'd stay there the entire hour just in case somebody came in. And I'd sit there and pray and be like, all right, Lord, like I'm gonna stay above board, right? I'm gonna do what I'm supposed to do. And if I just sit here and nobody comes, hey, that's your will, and that's fine. But like that's who I was. So I wanted to become a chaplain in the Air Force. So after I finished my bachelor's degree, I got commissioned as a second lieutenant and joined this program that allowed you to stay in the reserves while you get your master's degree so that you come back on as a full-time chaplain.
Wow. So you were an unofficial minister in the military.
Yeah, right.
Basically.
And
then planning to be a chaplain. Yeah.
And then when I graduated with my bachelor's and started my master's degree, I became a pastor and an official associate pastor out in Virginia. And I did that during the duration of my THM, master's degree in theology. I was a chaplain, a volunteer chaplain in the jail. So like I did that the ministry was my thing, right? That's what I did. And so my focus though, while I was getting my master's degree was I found out that I loved the esoteric. Apparently that's really what I boil it down. So like everybody did Greek. Everybody did Greek. So I'm going to focus on Hebrew because fewer people do that. Then I started doing Hebrew and it was like, well, everybody does Hebrew. I'm going to really focus on like Aramaic and these other Semitic languages. So but then it was like, so I took biblical Aramaic and it was like, yeah, but everybody does biblical Aramaic. So I'm going to do Targumic Aramaic. So I'm reading like Targum Onkelos and, reading the superlinear point anyway. So I spent 6 years there, doing Hebrew, doing Aramaic. I studied Akkadian while I was there, some Syriac, a little bit of Ugaritic. And then I taught Hebrew the last 2 years there. I taught the graduate seminars. Okay. The 2-year course cycle. And my GPA was high enough that I got accepted to Hopkins. In their Near Eastern Studies department. And so I talked to one of my professors, I think it was my theology professor actually, who pulled me aside in my 6th year. And I was just about done with my dissertation. I wrote on. While
you were at Capital Seminary.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I was writing on the meaning of the divine name El Shaddai. And he pulled me aside and he said, listen, I'm paraphrasing, but it was essentially that there are only a few people, relatively speaking, that have the. It was a nicer way of saying have the psychosis to endure a PhD program, because a lot of times the PhD program isn't about how smart you are. It's can you stay with it? Wow. Can you stick it out anyway? So he said you really should pursue a PhD program. And so Hopkins had a Near Eastern Studies department, and one of the things that happens, and I didn't realize that I had fallen prey to it until it was later pointed out, is that evangelicals often when they go to seminary, they get a master's degree, however big, and they learn Hebrew, because they don't think that things like critical scholarship, the formation of the Pentateuch, like the documentary hypothesis, those sorts of things, because they don't think they're legitimate, right? That obviously Moses wrote the Pentateuch, and obviously the Exodus happened in the 15th century or the 13th century, whatever you think, that all this other liberal scholarship, we don't have to engage with it, right? Except from an apologetics level. Like how do we show that we don't have to engage with this? And so what happens is you finish your master's degree, and you've really mastered Hebrew. That is the one thing that I can say about fundamentalist evangelical schools, is they really take the languages seriously. And so now you're like, I'm sight reading without vowel pointing the book of Jeremiah.
Wow.
It was a good program from that standpoint. And so when I finished, it was like, well, I don't really need to spend another 8-10 years with Hebrew, because like, I already know it, right? Like, what else is there?
Okay.
And so, and again, it's not like you go through this mental process, consciously. But what you end up doing is saying, well, like, what's an adjacent area of study that I can master, go get a PhD in, that will make it so that now I have like this combined, like it's like the Power Rangers or something, right? You bring these two things together to become, anyway. Sorry, I just dated myself. So I went into the field of Assyriology, and Assyriology is the study of the languages and cultures of ancient Iraq. And so, like, I mastered Sumerian and Akkadian. Of course, took a whole bunch every year of Hebrew because that was my minor. But like, learned archaeology, learned all about the history of Mesopotamia and the surrounding regions, ancient Near East as a whole. And what that meant was, in my mind, it was going to be like, got Hebrew, got the Old Testament. Now I'm getting all the background culturally to the Old Testament. And so now I'd be able to like have the total package, right? And to the point, now I'll stop talking, but to the point that when I always tell this story, you probably remember it from the video, but it's so critical, I think, to this part, is I was finishing up teaching Hebrew in my last class. It was the last class of the seminar. And I was leaving, and the dean of students, I'd been accepted to Hopkins with a full scholarship. And the dean of students came out and said, so Josh, you're going to Hopkins. Are you ready? Because that's a pretty liberal school. And I said, it is, but you know what? I'm going into the lion's den. But I held up my BHS, my Hebrew Bible, and I said, but I'm going to win souls for Christ. And that was how I went into that doctoral program. Wow. So that's how I got into it. That was the attitude that I brought into it. And then, the rest.
I'm just shaking my head because I'm thinking, like, because I know how the story goes.
Yeah.
Like, what if you had not gone to Hopkins? What if you had not studied the broader cultural, milieu, and what that did for your thinking? Yeah. Like, what would you be doing now? Like, would you be, would digital Hammurabi, be a thing?
Oh no, I would be. I suspect that I would have. I'd have gone back in the Air Force. I'd have finished out my 20. And I probably would have ended up back on the internet, but you'd see me as like I'd be like a Mike Winger, right? Yeah, like I'd be part of the apologetics empire.
Wow. Wow. Think about that. People who are watching, just think about that. Wow. Also, for the person who's watching, because what I run into a lot is people who are always trying to, they want to detract, or they want to take away from, the lived experience of the person who's deconverted.
Yeah. So
what do you mean? You call yourself a former Christian? I haven't said it yet. Dr. Josh is a former Christian. You deconverted while you were at Johns Hopkins, which we'll get into in a second. But what they like to say is, what do you mean former Christian? There's no such thing. If you could call yourself a former Christian, you never were.
Yeah, sure.
A Christian.
Yeah.
And I just want the people who are watching to think about this. There's so many things we could say to that, but one of the things I haven't said often is, what does it mean? Because they would look at your fundamentalism. They would look at Lancaster Bible College. They would look at, they would look at that and say, see, that's why you deconverted. You weren't the right kind of Christian. You didn't have the right kind of. We'll address that in a minute, but I want the person who's watching to think, what does it mean that God would allow someone like myself, Dr. Josh, to have the kind of lived experience where for decades of your life, you go on believing a certain thing, a certain way, and you come out of that You mean to tell me that the God of the Bible is behind that, letting someone believe something that's not true, or be the wrong kind of Christian so much that they would deconvert? He would allow this, and then allow us to, if this is all true, be eternally lost because we were the wrong kinds of Christian. Think about what your theology actually means. But okay, let's jump to, you're in the program at Johns Hopkins, loving it, I assume. Okay. Before the deconversion begins to happen, I guess I'm wondering. Well, let's just get right to it. What was it that caused you to say, "Man, this probably is not true"?
Yeah. So I guess the place to start there would be when I first got accepted to the school. I went for like a day experience, with the people that are in the department, and because the Assyriology program was sort of ramping up, had a brilliant new professor who's not new anymore, Dr. Paul Del Nero, who became my advisor. But things were a little complicated for him the way it was set up, and so I spent a lot of time in the beginning with what I knew, and that was with all the Hebrew Bible students. Like we would speak Hebrew to each other, in the classes, like, but I remember I went to one of the readings class. I think maybe they were doing. I think they were reading through 2 Kings or something for something. I don't remember what, but we were sitting around the table and I hadn't prepped anything. I didn't know that that's what they were reading. And so it got to me and, able to read the text but like, that's where I was in my learning. But I remember that a friend of mine named Andrew, was a wonderful guy, brilliant scholar, brilliant Hebrew Bible scholar. He, I was talking to him, getting to know him, and he said, "So, like, where are you coming from?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, so you're an evangelical?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "This will be interesting." And I said, "Why?" And he kind of chuckled, and he said, "Well, we'll just see how long it takes." And it was like at that moment I realized what he was saying, and I said, "You got the wrong guy."
He threw down the gauntlet.
Yeah, I mean, like you come at me, you better not miss, right? Of course, he wasn't talking about him, but it was like, no, you don't understand. My faith is real, and so each week, once the semester started, each week I'd see him almost every class. I'd see him, and and at least one of them, he'd kind of lean over and he'd say, "So, how's it going?" And at first my responses were, very smug. "Oh yeah, nothing too much yet, But as the weeks went by, it was a very painful semester. Because you ask what did it. So one of the things that my fundamentalism entailed was, just like other evangelicals, even though they play with the definitions of what this might mean, I believed in the verbal plenary inspiration of the text, and I believed in the inerrancy of the text down to
real quick. For those who are not familiar, verbal plenary, every word of the entire text inspired by God.
Yeah. Down to the grammatical forms, right? Now, we could play with that, and people do, and say like, "Oh, it's just the autographs." And of course, if you press them on what that means, that can be difficult for them. But nonetheless, it's like, I believe the text was the inspired, inerrant word of God. And so, and what that meant to me was that, like, things like the Exodus happened. If you wanted to know what happened, like, you just flip open to Exodus, right, and read it like there. That's what happened. And how was how did the earth come to be? It was open Genesis 1 and 2. Like, just read that. It's pretty straightforward. And And so what happened to me was that I'm taking, like, my first year, there's a 3-year history seminar that cycles. And the first year I took the history of Syro-Palestine. The second year was the history of Mesopotamia. And then the third is the history of Egypt. And it's just the whole year, every week, several hours seminar, going through all the history of that region. And starting off with the history of Syro-Palestine was tough for me because, believe it or not, we know a lot about it. And so, reading each week about what, like, we actually know from an archaeological standpoint, from a historical standpoint, the text that we have coming from the surrounding regions, and all eventually from the region itself, like, it was difficult. And in conjunction with that, I'm translating through, we took Kohelet that first semester. So I'm translating through the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. And then I'm also reading Sumerian and Akkadian literary texts, and coming to the realization very, very quickly that, like, boy, this stuff sounds familiar. This Atrahasis story, this Gilgamesh story, boy, something is ringing familiar to me. Anyway, so I remember that each week it just became more and more difficult, because it's like, well, that sounds like it either shows that the biblical texts are utilizing much earlier texts, or this particular thing that it says in the Bible, man, how did that happen this way? Because, like, I know what's going on in that period of history, and that doesn't work. So sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me was, we were going through the late Bronze Age, and so down near the end of the second millennium BCE, and we were talking about this great systems collapse, regional collapse that took place in the Mediterranean. And we started talking about the Sea Peoples as a group of people. Of course, you probably know, but just in case the audience doesn't, it's a group of people that shows up in Egyptian texts and shows up later in Canaan, at least in part. And we see destructions of cities throughout the Mediterranean during this time. There's a scholar by the name of Eric Klein, Cline, that wrote a book called 1177. If anybody's interested in this topic, like, go get a copy. He's super nice and super brilliant. But there's a group of people in the Sea Peoples called the Peleset. And the Peleset are the Philistines. And so we know when the Philistines got there. And we know when they got into Canaan. And it made the book of Genesis look real suspect with respect to the Philistines. And again, anybody listening, it's not like, oh, well, that's the only problem. No, but like, it was just that piece, seeing that, it was like, and and then I'll stop so you can, like, steer me however you want to steer me. But, like, the problem for me was that this was not fun. Every week, I was alone in Baltimore. I lived an hour and 45 minutes with my wife and kids out in Virginia. And so I would drive in on Sunday evening, and I had this dirty little room in a row house. It was like $500 a month. And I stayed there from Sunday night until Friday afternoon by myself, because that's what you needed to do to be able to do this. And so I was alone. and I'm not very good at being alone. And so I had a friend named Mark who went to seminary with me, wonderful friend. And he would drive up into Baltimore every week. He would pick me up and drive me out of the city, and we'd go to Uno's Pizzeria and we'd get a pizza, and then we'd walk or get a coffee, and we'd walk around Ellicott City or walk around a parking lot or something, and we would just talk. And I'm sorry if you can hear all that screaming. That is my kids.
Life.
Kids. I have 5 kids. Anybody watching doesn't know. The youngest are twins that are just about 2 years old, so they're playing. But we would walk around, and essentially, I would just sort of pour out my heart to him and be like, "This is what I'm struggling with." And he would say, "Okay, well, is it possible that this, or what, have you thought about it this way?" And I'd say, "Yeah, but like the problem is that." So it was a real struggle. A lot of nights crying.
So when I went through my process, I was afraid to share anything like that with the people that were my community, because I didn't want to cause them to stumble. Did you, like, what made you say I can dump this on Mark and not worry about him ending up in the same place that I'm at?
Because I assumed that I was wrong, right?
Wow.
And I knew that he would have the answer. Like he'd be able to, because here I'm in the midst of this thing, right? I'm like down in the trenches, and
you're in the lion's den.
Yeah, right. And so getting by, and he'd be able to say, whoa, okay, look, man, just take a step back, just relax, look. And he, like, taking nothing away from him, he was an amazing friend. And I still love him to pieces. But I mean, like, he did what he could do, right? But the reality is that it just,
you couldn't unsee what you had seen.
Yeah, the data points are the data points. And this is the point that I and then I'll shut up, I promise. But this is the point that I want to drive home. It wasn't that anything or everything that I learned definitively falsified Christianity. No one should hear me saying that. Any more than, anything that I could show you archaeologically would definitively disprove that I know of, like ancient aliens, right? Coming to tell people how to build the pyramids or something. Like, I don't know that I could definitively disprove that. But what it did is it made me question this enough that it made me take a step back from my interpretive model and to be able to say, okay, let me just assume for the sake of argument that this interpretive model is not the one that best explains these data points. What would?
Wow.
And this is why I had a friend, still have a very, very close friend. His name's Caleb Howard. He's out at Tyndale now. He came into the program as an evangelical a year after I did. And I remember calling him on the phone. He was asking me about, like, what's it like? And I said, so you're an evangelical. Listen, man, like be careful, right? When you come in. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. And he maintained his evangelical stance all the way through, still as an evangelical. And I've thought about why that is. And the answer is, he came from a school that was not fundamentalist.
Okay.
And because of that, and this is what makes me, one of the things that makes me dislike apologetics so much, is that he had apologetics. Now, all the apologists that are watching this are going, yes, right? Yeah.
We snatched one from the fire.
Yeah, we did it. Like, now we're emboldened. Here's the problem. The example that I give, or the comparison that I give, is the one that everybody knows, just in a different context. If you put a frog in lukewarm water and slowly turn the heat up, I've never done this, I've never seen it, but as I understand the story goes, he will cook alive, right? Because he gets used to the water, he gets used to the water, he gets used to the water. However, if you turn the heat up, real fast, or if you put him, drop him into a really hot pot of oil, he'll jump back out.
Right.
Taking nothing from Caleb, and I've told him this, right? So it's nothing that he hasn't heard me say before. I think that Caleb was introduced slowly and methodically and very strategically to problems in the text. Okay, look, there's this thing called the documentary. Let's talk about it. And apologetic arguments were developed for that one thing. And it's like, okay, so you're good there, right? All right, now let's talk about the next thing. And the problem is, for me, or the good thing for me, as I see it, was that it hit me all at once with no warning. And it made me jump out of the pot and go, is that where I want to be? Where else could I go? And so this is what I see happening. And this is why I think apologetics is very, very dangerous. Because see, the thing is, individually, had somebody been able to, like, when introduced to the Amarna period, right, and how that didn't really jive with the Exodus story, if they could have stopped and the apologists could have swarmed in and said, okay, Josh, let's walk through this. Like, what are some possible solutions here? If these people were actually educated people that I respected, it would be so much easier for me to go, okay, I got that. So then when it comes up later, it's like, yeah, but I don't even have to revisit that because I got that one. And that's the difference. That's the difference.
Wow. There's so much that you just said that's so helpful for so many people and rings so familiar to me. I remember when I was in seminary at Westminster, Peter Enns had already been let go years before I got there. I got a hold of one of his books that I was supposed to critique for an Old Testament theology class.
Of course.
And I did. I read it. I critiqued it harshly. But then another professor said, well, Pete Enns, he had some good points. I'm like, you're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, right.
The school fired him. You're not supposed to,
Right.
So what that caused me to do was it caused me to say, like you said, what if I dissociated myself a little? What if I just stepped away from my interpretive model and used another model just to see? I don't believe it,
right?
But let me just see if another model fit. And when I looked at a different model, I said that would explain so much. Not just another, like, or how did we become humans? God breathed, and it would explain the problems in the text. It would explain the development of humanity. It would explain the fossil record. It would explain. And so I remember being in seminary the last couple of years thinking with two minds. One, the one that I came in with, and the other, what if it's not true? What if there's another model? Now, I didn't have the liberal model. Like, what if, because to me, that just was, the liberal model was unchristian. I had read Machen's, Liberalism and Christianity. And so I couldn't take the liberal model. But now it seems like that's what many Christians are doing. Like, there's this liberal approach. So you kind of answered one of the questions I had, which was, why couldn't you just be a liberal Christian? And I guess you're saying because you went from hot to cold, or from cold water to hot water. It wasn't an incremental. But I'll ask it anyway, just to see what you might say, because I have very many friends. I have ongoing Facebook dialogue with Christians who they are adopting all of the apologetic strategies to get over this hurdle and that hurdle. And one of them, I say this to them quite often, like, if your parishioners knew what you really believe, they would leave your church. All these concessions that you're making to still believe the Bible. But I guess I'll ask you just to see what you'd say. You went from cold water to being dropped in this hot water of liberal or critical scholarship. You jumped out of it, couldn't go back to the cold water. What prevented you from? Because I guess the people at Johns Hopkins, they weren't liberal Christians. They were just critical scholars.
It turns out that many of them would identify as Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, but it never factors in in the slightest. It never comes up.
Was there never an indentation? Like, did somebody never come and say, hey, Josh, you don't have to leave the team completely, just be a liberal version?
No, because this is what people don't. I think people that I engage with online, they don't get, because they always say, "Oh, we don't have to listen to you because you and all your professors are just like these liberal atheists," and it's like, what? Like, no, they're not. Go to church on Sunday morning up in Baltimore, you'll probably see several of them, right? It's just, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant because this interpretive model that requires the biblical text to be this foundational, pathway to morality or something, like they look at you like you have two heads. Like, what are you talking about? It's an ancient text like any other ancient text, right? Because their faith is very different. But for me, again, it had to do with answering the question to myself, which interpretive model makes more sense? So I can't disprove that if I pick up this emery board and drop it, that 10 million demons weren't forcing it to the ground, right? I can't how would I disprove that? I don't know how I'd disprove that. But because we have this theory of gravity, not that I understand it, terribly well, but because we have this theory of gravity, it's like, oh, well, okay, well, that seems to explain it without the use, of the supernatural. And what is it, Occam's razor? I think actually, I don't even know if that would apply there, but it like, if we don't need the supernatural to make that work, like it just seems to me like, does it disprove that there aren't demons? No, of course, but that doesn't make sense to me. Okay. So when I look at ancient texts and when I look at the way that texts go together, and think about something that you've probably never heard me talk about, something like slavery in the in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. Like, you can do all kinds of apologetics to try to make it so that, okay, well, here's why God endorsed slavery in the Old Testament and said, like, here's how you get chattel slaves and pass them on as inheritance. But this is how it could make sense, right? Is that possible? Sure. Is it possible there are demons pushing that emery board down? Yeah. But I mean, like, for me, this is what I would expect if human beings from that period were writing this book. Right. So it was an additional explanation that I didn't think was required. Yeah. And didn't make sense to me. Yeah. So
that's Occam's razor. Yeah. Multiplying explanations needlessly, like, why do I need to say these many things? Because once you start going down that road of using the Bible to explain X, you're going to have to multiply more. Well, I get over that hurdle by doing this and that hurdle by doing that. Yeah. Okay. So you said something in your deconversion video. After you had done the video, you started taking questions. Okay. And this is when I fell in love with you, Dr. Josh. I was already rocking with you, but somebody asked you, I think it might have been a passage from Daniel, and maybe this will come up in another question I have for you so you can tie it together. But I think it may have been a passage from Daniel, or recognizing that Daniel's account of Nebuchadnezzar cannot have been historical. I think that might have been what triggered it. But anyway, it was about at that time you were talking about that, and someone asked you, how long was the period from so you know what I'm about to say?
I know where you're going. Go ahead.
How long was the period from you realizing that the Bible was not correct about that historical detail, and you believe, and you saying you can't believe the Bible, you can't trust the Bible? Yeah. And your response was about a half an hour.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah. I've caught so much flack from that. I
thought you were going to say like a half a year, a half a decade. You said it was about and it was the most sincere. You weren't trying to be funny or anything. You said it's about about a half an hour. But it rocked me because I remember sitting in class and I was fighting against Peter Enns, trying to get away from Genesis 1-3 being literal. I was fighting against, and I remember just it was a flash of a moment where I said, but something else like evolution or something like that. I said that would kind of explain this a lot more naturally.
Yes.
And in the flash, I said, oh, so this probably isn't true, talking about the Bible.
Yeah.
So this probably, and it in an instant hit me. This probably isn't true. And I feel like everything clicked. Everything made sense at that moment.
Yes.
And so when you said about a half hour, I said, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
But you said you caught flack for that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, from both sides, but I think more from the, still evangelical crowd, because, as you said earlier, everybody is always looking to show how you weren't actually a Christian. Right. And so, well, it took a half hour. I mean, come on, like, whose faith leads in a half hour?
Yeah.
But here's the, like, so I'll describe it a little more than for the audience sake.
Yes, please.
Because the way that I would say this happened more precisely is that think of me as a rubber band, right? Or I'm on one of those large full-size slingshots or something, and people are pulling me back and pulling me back and pulling me back, and I'm holding on to the walls, right? Like no, and they're pulling me back further, and but I can hold on, and hold on, and then finally somebody pulls me back so far, and it's like, oh, phew, gone. Because everybody's got to remember, if I believe in verbal plenary inspiration, I believe in the inerrancy of the text. I believe that these stories happened as the biblical texts say. Like, once you get a crack in the glass, and you put pressure on it, it splinters, right? That's it. And so this is why I say that somebody who came at this from a more fundamentalist position, if they could be introduced by people that were evangelical Christians, that are educated, that are doing this very systematically, to be able to say, okay, look, you're a fundamentalist, right? Let's take this one step at a time. Let's talk about the flood. Okay, what do you think about the flood? All right, I get you. Let's do this a different way, right? Like, so what if, and you deal with that issue. So a great example of this, I think, is Exodus 12:37, right, with the Exodus. And, Exodus 12:37 talks about how 600,000 fighting men on foot left out of Egypt in the Exodus. Well, that's an impossible number, right? From what we know, even among evangelical scholars like James Hoffmeyer, like, what do we know about New Kingdom Egypt? And again, all this stuff, just for the audience sake here. Like, there might have been 2.5 million people in all of New Kingdom Egypt, at that time. And that's how many Israelites you would need with 600,000 fighting men. And so once this became clear, if you're a fundamentalist and I show you, like the studies about how they determine population in New Kingdom Egypt, and then showed you this number, and it was like, this is an impossible number, that might be something that like blows you back, right? But if an Egyptologist who studies this stuff says, okay, but hold on. I'm an evangelical. What if 1,000 here, when it says 600,000, doesn't mean 1,000? What if it means like a military unit? Now you have 600 military units. Well, that could be a much smaller number, right? Should it mean military unit? Spoilers, no. But that is something that gives you okay. All right. So now Like, because I can take you to some verses where that word Aleph there, the Hebrew word Aleph, does mean like a small unit of people. They're different contexts, but you know, I can still show you where it says that, and you could be like, oh, because you already believe the text to be inerrant.
Right.
And so if you get and this is what I said in the second volume of my series that I won't say yet.
Yeah.
But this is the thread that runs throughout it, is that apologetics is built upon, well, is it possible? Is it possible that this is the case? And if you can find a possibility, that one's taken care of because you already know it to be the case.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference here. So for me, it was like, there wasn't, you know, an apologetics professor each time somebody pulled that band back a little bit further saying, whoa, Josh, let me release the tension here on this one thing.
Right.
It was pull back. And then it was like, it was so tight that I couldn't hold on anymore. And when the moment that you can't hold on anymore, in a fundamentalist view, it's a house of cards. If one piece goes, the whole thing goes. And so that was what blew me back to say, okay, like the thing that makes more sense here is that this just isn't true.
Yeah. There are people who, like you said, they will want to jump on, oh, so it was that. Oh, so it was that. Oh, so it was the culmination of this, and that. What they don't factor in is once you start taking this apologetic approach to, well, I can get around this problem this way, that problem that way, that problem, it does create a sense in your mind of, okay, at what point do I stop doing that?
Yeah.
And will I have to do that ad infinitum?
Yeah.
And I remember just in seminary saying, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we're looking at how the New Testament authors are using the Old Testament, and we're trying to find ways to justify how they could use that text to say this. I remember saying, I didn't sign up to do this.
Yeah.
And this, quite honestly for me, was I didn't sign up to be God's publicist, to be his spin doctor, to try to, I thought I was here to defend truth, not to justify how the Bible's not wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's a difference between those two.
This is why, Brady, the one of the stories I have found in interacting with Bart Ehrman over the past couple of years. I don't know if you guys know, but you know, Megan is the host of Bart Ehrman's new podcast, Misquoting Jesus.
Oh, wow.
They actually just recorded another podcast this morning.
That's cool.
So
wait,
like,
and who's Megan for the listener?
Oh, my wife. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
Who is also a seriologist.
And your wife is still a Christian.
Yeah, she's an Anglican. Yep.
Anglican Christian, co-hosting or hosting a podcast with Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman. Yep.
So if you guys could just try to just peer into like what's going on here.
That's right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. But he tells the story, and I'll get some of the details wrong, I'm absolutely certain. But he talks about when he was still fundamentalist, he was writing a paper, and I can't remember what, I think it was during his doctoral program. I can't remember. But anyway, he was writing this paper. It was like this pivotal moment for him, where he was writing on a contradiction in the book of Mark. I think it was Mark. I'm gonna get all these details wrong. But anyway, he comes up with this like brand new, harmonization, this thing that makes it work, this contradiction. So it's not a contradiction. It's very complicated. And anyway, so he turns this paper in, and he gets the paper back. He's so proud. He gets the paper back. He flips to the back, and his professor has written on there just these words: maybe Mark just got it wrong. And it was, he describes this as this blowback moment, right? This eye-opening experience. And I think a lot of people have these things.
Yeah.
And, whether that starts them on a trajectory that takes them, 6 months, a year, 10 years, whatever, to actually, that I think the difference here is not being a psychologist, not being my field, whatever, but like, just in my own experience, I wonder if it's not so much that they've been that the length of time that it takes them to ultimately deconvert is not so much convincing about the data, but being comfortable with the idea.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and you know, I'm sure that that's different for all kinds of people, but I'm sure that there are just places, experiences that people have where it's like being able to be comfortable with the idea of accepting,
Yeah.
as and I'll shut up after this, but like lest anybody, you know, misunderstand what I'm saying. I left the faith kicking and screaming. I did not want to leave. And in fact, I've done a couple of interviews with, at least one interview. I think it's been two with Michael Brown.
Yeah. I saw one of them.
Yeah. Maybe it was just one. I can't remember. I've interacted with him a number of times, but, and he asked me in that interview point blank, like if you know, your prior faith, you could know that it was true, like you could be demonstrated that it's true. Would you like snap your finger and have that happen? And like it's not even a thought. Of course, of course, my God, because what that would mean for me is that not only are all of these problems that I like, the problem of evil or the problem with the historicity of the text, all these things, not only would they be solved, because they would be in my mind, right? Because if God's real, then, you know, if God exists and it's the God that I, you know, worshipped, well, then that all those things have morally justified reasons and they have explanations that are just higher than my ways, right? So, of course I would. My God, the security of knowing where I'm going when I die, like, good grief. But I don't think it is.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I saw that interview and, you know, it was very emotional. The one that I saw was very emotional.
Yeah.
Where basically, you know, you had a tragic situation, you know, and family situation. And it was almost like in that moment, like, who was it that wrote the book? Sometimes Illness Wins. It's a book that basically just gives a non-religious answer to dealing with grief. And but the religious answer, I mean, to dealing with grief is almost like, hey, you get to see that loved one again, and God has a reason for it, and all that kind of. So in the interview I watched with you and Dr. Brown, it was such a heartfelt moment where you kind of just were like, man, like if I could have my former faith back, it would get me through this, but I don't have that. And it was just a real moment.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make the faith true.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that we've come up with a way to give ourselves comfort.
Yeah.
That now we don't have once we leave the faith doesn't make the faith true.
Yeah. Yeah. It sucks. I mean, like, it sucks. Because like when that happened, I mean, we lost our son, right? Like, and you know, the most comforting thing that anybody said to me when that happened, was we got back from the funeral home, and there was a family friend there, and I remember exhausted, sitting down at the counter. We have this little island thing in the kitchen, and sat down, and my eyes are just bloodshot. I cry very easily. Trying to actually hold it together here. And I remember just sitting there, and she said, "It's just not fair." And that, as simple as that sounds, was so powerful to me, because it said, in those few words, you are absolutely justified to feel the way that you feel, to hurt the way that you hurt. And I'm here for you.
Yeah.
and it's shit, right? It's shit. That's and all of that. To contrast that with maybe the worst of what I've seen from people that do have faith is my father, I guess probably about 5 years ago now, lost his older brother. And I've never seen my father cry except at that funeral. My father's 6'4", 280. He's got hands that are like baseball mitts. I mean, he's just a big man, and grew up very hard. I've never seen him cry except at that funeral. And he was sitting in. We were out to dinner a couple weeks maybe a week after Uncle Mordecai died, and at our favorite restaurant that we went to every weekend. And this friend of his walks up, and well-meaning, slaps him on the back and says, "Well, he's in a better place." And there are only a few moments in my life where I've actually thought my father is going to kill this person. Like there haven't been, like, you can see him get mad, but there are only a few times that I've thought the person here is in actual danger, right? And that was one of them. Because these platitudes, like it's this over-reliance on this religious system. And to what it does is it said to my dad, everything that you're feeling, you shouldn't be feeling.
Wow.
All the pain, all the hurt. Hey, you get to see him again. He's in a better place. Right? And it's like, So there are some benefits. As much as it sucks, I think it makes us as a species, not my field of expertise, but just in my experience, it feels like it makes us as a species come up with better ways to engage with one another, to give one another comfort, that don't rely on these things that I think make us weaker in other areas when it comes to dealing with people. Anyway.
There's a lot there. We won't drill down on that, but for the listener, I mean, if you could just unpack that statement about things that make us weaker just as a species, even if in a moment it might give someone, or it's intended to give someone more comfort. A lot there. I'm trying to think if I want to say anything about. We don't have to dwell on this at all. When I watched that interview with you and Dr. Brown, I felt like if I was a Christian watching that, I would have felt justified in my worldview, because in that moment, you seem to be wanting what I had, this peace that passes all understanding, or this, just this reliance on God's sovereignty, whatever. And because you were being very vulnerable, but I can imagine very many Christians looking at that saying, then we're right, because look, he doesn't have the peace that we have. But I don't know if there's anything that you would want to say to that. I watched that and I felt like that's not the point. That's not
definitely not the point. No, I mean, again, like, it is absolutely the case that if I could snap my fingers and all of that would be true, I would. And the reason that I think that's so important is that there's so many people that want to accuse me and accuse others of, oh, you just hate God.
Right.
The bad man hurt you, and so that's why you've turned from God, or you had a bad breakup, or somebody in the church wasn't nice to you, and like, I'm sure that all of those things happen.
Right.
But for me, and I'm absolutely certain for many, many others, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I think that's meaningful in a way that is important here, because the data in my mind requires it.
You're following the evidence where it leads.
As much as I don't want to go where it leads, You know, that there are many, like you said, if you hadn't gone to Hopkins, in many cases, right, this is like the Matrix, right? And what is it that the guy said? I can't remember his name now, of course, but that was meeting with Mr. Smith and talking about how he was going to get plugged back in, and he wanted to have his memory erased, and he wanted to be wealthy and maybe a movie star. And Cypher was his name. And yeah, sure, like sign me up, right? But here's the deal, like that the Matrix isn't real, right? And so, like, if you could say, oh no, Josh, actually, look, like here it's actually been proven that like here God came down. Say hi to God, right? Like everything's cool. Like we have our own apocalypse here. Oh, well, I mean, like I'm on board, right? Because that sounds great. But I can't. Because that's not like I'm not a, what do you say, a doxastic voluntarist, right? I don't choose what I believe,
right?
Unfortunately.
Yes. So. And that view says none of us do, right? We don't choose what we believe. We either are convinced or we're not convinced.
Yeah.
I differ a little bit. You can tell me what you think about this. I'm always open to challenges or whatever. But if someone says, well, how about you, Brady? Josh says if he could get back to belief, if he could snap his fingers, would you? I don't think I would. And here's why for me. One of the biggest reliefs that I had when I deconverted was, I said, so no one's going to hell. You know what I mean? Like, if I could snap my fingers and believe again and then be saved again in my mind, I'm back to thinking about all the masses of people in our generation and those prior who are not believers.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So I couldn't get, like, the kind of God that I worshiped, I now look and I'm appalled by that God's plan, which I used to call his wisdom at work.
Yeah.
I used to call it his grace and his beauty. I don't see any of that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think built into my premise, I mean, you make a good point, right? Built into my premise is that ultimately there are morally justified reasons for all of that, right? Like how, again, how do we answer the problem if I don't think you can? But built into that is that actually, even though it doesn't make sense to me and it seems really, really awful to me, you know, that actually there is this Isaiah 55 moment,
his
right?
ways
Where
are
it's
higher than ours, and
but yes, I am completely like I totally understand what you're saying. Like, how do you make it so that Samson's not a terrorist in Judges 16? Like, how do you do that? Like, you'd have to just build it into the premise. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you go in a minute, but I want to talk about the handbook. We saved it to the end just in case anybody was like, I'm not watching this crap. You've heard enough now where you can't unhear it. So
right.
So you wrote 2 volumes of a work. Is it 2 volumes so far or 2 volumes total?
Yeah.
2 volumes so far. The book is called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. And it's volume 1 and volume 2. Why write that? What is it about? Why title it that?
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about 1 or 2 things in it, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I guess a bit of background.
I'm sorry. Before we do that.
Oh yeah.
So you're an atheist.
Yes.
So then I have to ask another question then leading into that.
Yeah, sure.
Why deconvert from the Christian faith and go to atheism? Why not just become a deist or a theist? Why atheism?
Yeah. I think that at first, because I was a fundamentalist, it's that very, sort of presuppositional approach. It's either this God, the Christian God, or it's no God.
Gotcha.
And so when I when I deconverted, I became an atheist because, well, it's either like there aren't other gods, right? It's just this one. So if that one's not true, then there aren't any.
Right.
And so after a little while, actually, I went to Syria. I don't know that I've talked about this actually online. You might be getting the first crack at this.
Right.
I went to Syria in 2010. It would have been just before the Civil War, and excavated there with a team at the site of Mara, which was an amazing experience. But while I was there, like I came back and sort of had started to toy with this idea that maybe things are just broader. I think was the word that I would have used.
You were still a Christian at that time?
No. I deconverted by
that
point.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so it's like maybe there's some sort of spirituality, whatever that might mean. I don't know. You know, I mean, I'm not thinking about it too terribly much. And so that was sort of a catalyst that brought me into a soft agnosticism. Mostly it was because I had 80 hours a week that I was doing, studying for my PhD. And so I didn't have time to care about much anything else.
Gotcha.
So I became this sort of soft agnostic because it didn't matter. All that, it didn't inform my schooling. And so it just didn't matter. So I went with the label agnostic throughout. If anybody asked, I went with the label agnostic. I don't know. Yeah.
So it wasn't, we can't know. It was just, you don't know.
Right.
Okay.
And so then when we started Digital Hammurabi, then it became very like, you have to nail it down. Right. So yeah, I guess I'm an agnostic, right? I don't know. And then somebody sort of pressed me. And again, philosophy is absolutely not my field. But somebody was like, so do you believe in God? Like, no. Like, well, you're kind of an atheist then, right? I guess you can be an agnostic atheist, but you're an atheist because you don't believe in God. Like, okay, well, is that right? Fuck am I know, but that's how I don't believe that God or gods exist, right? Or maybe more precisely, on the proposition, do gods exist? I say I think that is false.
Okay.
So with that as sort of the background, when I started, the reason that I got onto YouTube in the first place was people were using, in particular, the Hebrew, like using the Old Testament and going to the Hebrew, trying to go to the Hebrew and the ancient Near Eastern texts in ways that were very apologetic, right? And wrong, frankly. And so I ended up making videos about things like the first thing that came up was this, right? Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And I talk about that far more than anybody would ever want to talk about it. We just did another 3.5-hour panel on it last night over on Deep Drinks podcast. I would highly recommend it. We did it with, I did it with 4 other PhD scholars. It was an amazing panel.
Okay.
So I ended up doing a series of videos responding to apologists talking about saving the Old Testament. And I thought, well, I've done all this research on this. I'm just going to throw a little popular level book together on it.
Okay.
So I did. So then I did all these other video series, right, which required lots of research, all in my spare time. And so like I wrote about the dating of the book of Daniel, did a video on that. Then I did a video on, did Moses write the Pentateuch? Then I did a video on the prophecy against Tyre in Ezekiel 26. So these types of sort of hot button issues. And so I had all this research, I had all these scripts written out, and I was like, you know what? I should just sort of put these, like I did with the slavery thing, I should just sort of put them all into a book. And then I thought, well, I should probably go, put like introductory material. So I have a chapter on like the narrative, the story itself of the Old Testament. I have a chapter on history of the ancient Near East. I have a chapter in each volume on archaeology. What is it? How does it work? Here are some test cases. You can see how it works. And that sort of fronts the book. But the whole point of these volumes, it's geared toward the atheist skeptic audience, because what I find over and over and over again is that people, especially people that deconvert, find themselves at the proverbial Thanksgiving table, right? With Aunt Petunia saying, how come you're not a Christian anymore? Look at all the prophecies in the Old Testament, or look at, all the archaeological evidence that we have for the Exodus, or, one of a million things. And having to respond to that in a meaningful way. And what ended up happening in my experience watching people was that, like, they they'd say to somebody like, well, look, like, how can God drown the entire world and all those innocent babies? Or how can, in 1 Samuel 15, God command the Israelites and Saul to wipe out the Amalekites, specifically including infants and babies, right? And the apologist comes back with, well, do you even know the context of 1 Samuel 15? And if you don't know who the Amalekites are, if you don't know, the ambush that was laid in Exodus and talked about in Deuteronomy, like, if you don't know the background to that stuff, then the apologist can just sort of write you off, right? Like, you don't even know the context. So what context is required for killing innocent babies? I don't know, but hey, that's what they go with. So that's what the purpose of the books of that series is to have someone primarily focused on atheists and skeptics who are having to deal with apologetic arguments. But it's written in a way that it's actually friendly to people that are still evangelical believers. And let me explain very quickly what I mean by that. In volume 2, I have a chapter on the historicity of the Exodus. Is it history or myth, or something in between? And at the end of the chapter, in the conclusion, I basically walk through and say, look, like, in a very real sense, it doesn't actually matter. It shouldn't matter to you as a believer if the Exodus happened exactly as the biblical texts say that it did. It shouldn't matter to you if actually the Exodus is a myth that developed because a handful of slaves escaped from Egypt and the end of the 13th century, early 12th century, and came up into the highlands of Canaan and met up with this group of burgeoning Israelites and said, hey, look, we escaped and Yahweh delivered us, and that became like the national myth, right? Like, that shouldn't bother you, depending on how you're holding your faith. So it's not intended to be like, Christianity's wrong, Christianity's false. Like, do I think it is? Yeah. But again, my wife is a Christian, and like we'll never have that conversation because I respect her and she respects me, and she's very intelligent and I'm very intelligent, and well, I'm sort of intelligent. So she's very intelligent. I'm just trying to keep up. But yeah, but that's what it's for. So hopefully they're tools that can be used. Like, I'll say this and I'll be quiet, but if you are listening and you're an evangelical Christian that is like looking to put down liberal scholarship, whatever you think that means, this is probably a pretty good place to start, because what I do in these books is take the topic, let's say, of violence and genocide in the Old Testament. All I do is go pull all of the subject matter experts in Hebrew Bible and in the field of Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern studies and say, okay, what is it that they're all agreeing on about this topic? Here you go. So if you're looking to disprove it, this is going to be like a one-stop shop.
Wow, there you go. How about that?
So
we just sold a bunch of books just now. And there's an audio version.
Yes. Read by Seth Andrews, who...
Oh, that's Seth reading that. Wow, cool.
Whatever anybody thinks about Seth, he used to be like a radio host. So his voice is like, it's like liquid gold.
What's funny is I just drove from Tampa to Orlando, and I was watching The Line with the Atheist Experience. One of those he was on.
Yeah.
And the way something in his voice, I just was like, wow, this guy's got a very
Yes.
soothing voice, and he's got different, intonations he hits. And so now you're telling me that was him reading it. That's cool.
Yeah, he's very, very good. Very, very
yeah.
good.
Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to help me with one thing.
Sure.
So part of my deconstruction was going through Genesis, going through Exodus, and having to say, okay, so then God didn't do these things, at least not literally. But if he didn't do these things, they were the track record for me getting to the New Testament and saying, oh, well, the same God who did that is the same God who raised Jesus from the dead. So not to take away from the point you just made, like, you could read and say the Exodus may not have happened that way, or may not have happened. And for me, if that doesn't happen, who's raising Jesus from the dead? What's the track record of his gods?
Sure.
Me? But so there were people who read my book or parts of my book, and they said, well, so you wanted this fundamentalist, literalist view of Genesis, the creation accounts. What if the authors were just using these common stories polemically?
Sure.
So you put a different God's name in, and you've got so many good things you say about just how that culture, how they use similar stories to make different points about, well, no, our God's the one who did it, and our God did it simpler than the way your God did it. Our God did it faster with less, struggle than your God.
Yeah.
But if it's just polemic that they're using here, why does that not rescue the Bible from claims of falsehood? Like, couldn't that get the God of the Bible off the hook?
I mean, I suppose it's going to bump you. It's going to have to bump you out of this fundamentalist view of the text. But again, now we're talking to me. Now what you're having to do, or an individual is having to do, is to say, okay, so I'm going to agree that this is another ancient Near Eastern text that is written just like we would expect it to be written amongst all the other ancient Near Eastern texts that exist, right? And now where we are is, at best,
okay.
Right? I mean, I can't, the 500 million demons pushing that down would explain it, because look, it did it again, right? Of course, it could be gravity, right? So both explain it. So then at that point, I think where the person has to begin to wrestle is, so now you've got a deity that endorses slavery. You have a deity that commands genocide. You have a deity that, oddly enough, embraces the patriarchal system just like everybody else did. Like, okay, how do you explain that, right? And so now your apologetics, in other words, the more you dig, the more your apologetics have to grow. And so you end up like when I first came on to YouTube, the slavery arguments were like, well, it wasn't real slavery. It wasn't like the antebellum South. It's like indentured servitude, and it's just not, that's warm and fuzzy sort of slavery, whatever the fuck that means. Which some of the people that made these arguments, I just like, it made me want to cry, honestly, because it's like, guys, anyway, so I feel like by bringing to bear consensus scholarship on this issue, it's sort of put to bed a lot of these bad apologetic arguments. But what's coming out now is adjustments, right? And you're starting to see people go like, okay, well, all right, sure. It's bad slavery. But maybe what's happening is like God is allowing it because he knows man is going to do it in the Old Testament. But then as you like move forward into the New Testament, it they start to show how it's bad. And then you point out, but they don't. And it's like, well, okay, so they don't condemn it, but yeah, but they utilize it, right? And yeah, but and they say the masters, or slaves should stay with their masters. Yeah. But maybe it's like just a little bit. But so there's like a trajectory of it getting better, and you're like, okay, at what point do you say, yeah, is that possible?
Right.
Sure. But now you're having to more and more engage with and stand upon the possibility of something being the case, as opposed to relying on the data show this to be much more likely. And that, to me, I think things like the problem of evil and some of these other issues, if you can't rely on the inspiration and inerrancy of the text, now you're having to rely on philosophical arguments. And I don't know, at that point, it just starts to get really, really weak for me.
Yeah. That was my process, was when I thought about doing the liberal thing, it was almost like, just like I said, this, when would it stop?
Yeah.
When would I draw the line? And what do you do when I draw the line differently than someone else? Like, where is God? Where is the Holy Spirit at in that?
Yeah.
It just, like you said, it all seemed to fit a different model. This is what you would get if men were at the base of it, not God.
And I would say this, sort of maybe as a last thing to say, like, if I ever were to become a spiritual person, I think where I would fall is God, the God that you see in the old Sumerian texts, and the God that you see in the old Babylonian texts, and the Neo-Assyrian text, and the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament, and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is all the same God. And these writings reflect people interacting with what they understand to be the numinous, right? What they understand to be the divine. And so is there going to be some commonality between all of them? Probably. Right? Are they going to be radically different in the details? Sure. Are they going to mix in all their own ideas about what women are, who women are, slavery, all this stuff? Yeah, they're going to do that. And so it's going to reflect all of that. But this is their way of wrestling with it, right? Like, again, do I think that's true? No. But could that explain the data? Yeah. I mean, it could. I don't see that being reasonable, and it still leaves me with questions about, like, things like, sorry, now we're getting into philosophical stuff that I think actually could be answered, but just maybe not to my satisfaction.
So what you just said, you made me think about this. And if you have to go, just we can cut it, but you just made me think about this real quick. What I hear, so one of my old professors at Lancaster Bible College, and I read this in a lot of different people's work, but the God of Israel was unique. You have a monotheistic religion in the midst of polytheism, and the things that God is saying. Like, I hear you say this is the same God with just these different tweaks, but does the uniqueness of Israel's God not demonstrate the truthfulness of this one religion? Like,
I would say that under this model that I've just proposed as a possibility, it would be akin to, like, I don't know, there's a car crash and 15 people see it and 15 people describe it, right? They're all interacting with the same event, but they're going to say things very often drastically different, probably wrong. Right, in many cases. What they're describing has reality, right? It was a thing that actually happened, but they're all describing it in a way that they're bringing all of their own experiences to it, all of their own background, their poor eyesight, their poor hearing, their bad memory. Maybe they were having an argument at the time, so maybe they can't draw very well, maybe they can't write very well, whatever. And so, like, they're bringing all of their imperfections to it and trying to describe how they're interacting with this scene. So in that sense, like, under that interpretive model, again, not that I think that this is true, but if it were, like, so then the Israelites, just like, just like first millennium Assyrian Babylonia did to some degree, to greater degrees anyway. And certainly like in the Amarna period, you started to see it. They start to go, our God is special. And so, yeah, like that would just be them bringing their own ideas to it and interacting with it. And this is the product that comes out of it. I think that faith position ultimately would have to say, things like the resurrection, things like, this is all people interacting with the divine. Was there a guy that really resurrected from the dead? But it may not matter. Yeah, that may not matter under that interpretive model, because it's like what's the event that they're describing? What's the God that they're interacting with? And but that probably was not helpful to anyone.
No, well, I think there's a lot in there. Hopefully people are combing through this, because for those who, if you know Dr. Josh, this guy you're a treasure, like you're a walking treasure. The time that you put into first just your studies. I think people who deconvert after going through the studies that someone like you, being from the evangelical side, so what people who hold the text as sacred and take it seriously, what they would say. But then you also have this other side where you look at it critically. I just think you have so much to offer.
Well, maybe this would be good to do then, just knowing the potential audience that might watch this. It might be good, since we've spent a bunch of time talking about like, was I really a Christian? That sort of thing. This is something that I like to do with people to sort of maybe give them a little more confidence that I actually was. So when I was a Christian, if somebody came up to me and said, like, what do I do to be saved? Right. Well, I mean, my first response would be, we can't do anything. Right. But this is what I would say to people. And if somebody said, well, how do you know that you're a Christian? This is what I would have said. I was born with a sinful nature because of Adam and the fall. I'm a sinful human being, just like every man is sinful. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And there's nothing that I can do to rid myself of that sin nature and the sin that comes from it. Yeah, come on, somebody. And because of that sin and that sin nature, I am destined to be eternally separated from God, because God is holy and God is just and must punish sin and can't have any sin in his presence. And so I'm destined for hell. And all humanity throughout the ages has been, ever since the fall. However, into that stepped Jesus Christ, God in flesh, part of the Trinity, who came down in Philippians 2, 6, and 7, right? Came down and lived a perfect sinless life, was tortured and died on a cross to pay the penalty for our sins, and rose again the third day, completely making it possible for us to be justified in the sight of a holy God. And so what do we have to do to merit that? Well, we can't, right? We can't merit that, but it was graciously given as a free gift. So salvation is by grace. We're saved by grace through faith, not of ourselves. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. And so how do you receive that justification? How is that imparted to you? How do you get that righteousness imparted to you? So that when God looks at you, he sees a righteous, justified human being, sinless human being. Well, you say, I'm a sinner and there's nothing that I can do in and of myself to get rid of that sin. But Jesus Christ, when he came and died and rose the third day, paid the full penalty for my sin and for everybody else's sin. And that if I trust in that, have faith in that free gift, and trust that when he died on the cross, he paid the penalty for my sin as well, that I have the very righteousness of Christ imputed to my account, that I can and the Holy Spirit comes in and seals me unto the day of redemption, and that when I die, I'm ushered into His presence, right? And so, yeah, I knew the gospel, right? I believed every word of that. I used to talk about when I was in the jail, that the analogy that I would give is I would say to this person, hey, look, like, this is like what Christ has done for you. It's like you're here in this life sentence and you're sitting in the jail cell. And I come in and I say, hey, I just talked to the judge and I paid, don't worry about how, but I paid the penalty for you. I paid the fine, I paid whatever. I've satisfied the debt that you owed to society. So the judge has issued a decree, or like an order, for you to be released. You are a free man. You're a free person. But listen, this building is getting ready to collapse. It's going down, right? It's on fire, whatever. You just have to walk out with me. Just come on, let's go. And I say to the inmate, that I'm talking to, like, and you say back to me, no, there's maximums. There are armed guards out there with rifles. I don't believe that the building's actually on fire. And what's more, I don't believe that you paid but you don't know what I did, right? I don't believe that you satisfied that debt. So I'm staying right here, right? Because I'm not going out there and getting shot. And I think that's actually a pretty decent analogy, because what is it that the person has to do to pay the penalty? Nothing. It's been done, right? But if they don't accept it and have it imputed by walking out, right, by trusting and in faith, just accepting that free gift. Again, somebody might push back on me. Oh, well, they have to walk out, so that's a work. Yeah, okay, I get it. The analogy is not perfect, but anyway. So I think for the listener, for the person watching, like, rest assured. My mother said to me just the other day, I was talking to her on the phone, and she said, well, Josh, maybe you just had a head knowledge, right? Maybe you just didn't believe that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what that means.
Right.
Because I lived my life by this for 26 years. This wasn't like an academic pursuit of mine. Like, this was who I was. This was.
Well, think about this too. There's several things there. For those who are fans of mine, we're fans of my cross movement. We had one of our songs. We had a song called "Off the Hook," and the whole song was a analogy of the rapper of the song. One of our guys, Ambassador. He's sentenced, or he's summoned to come to court, and in court, the prosecutor lists all of his sins, and then gives him a life sentence. And then in the third verse, the prosecutor, the prosecutor or the defender? Oh no, the judge. In the third verse, the judge sentences him to life. And then the judge actually goes and pays his life sentence. Like, the judge gets killed and lets the guy go free. And so the listeners who are like, yo, he just talked about, that song is called "Off the Hook." But your articulation of the gospel demonstrates that, at the very least, you had head knowledge. Yeah. But then, like you said, it's not just a head thing. This is what you spent your life believing. You gave your life to this. I don't know how the listener can hear someone say those things and then go on to say, well, then maybe it was just, like, what are you going to say? Yeah.
And they will. Whatever it is, they'll say it, right? Because that's cult mentality. That's what it is. And I get it. It's what I would have said, right? Because the text says it, right? 1 John, it's like, it seems so clear. So I get it. I guess I'm not begrudging that. But I want them, if there's ever a moment where they're sitting by themselves and thinking, I wonder if Josh really was a Christian. I was.
Yeah. Same. Or I know there are people who are looking to take the legs away from this. We believed what the gospel presentation that Josh just gave. I'm sure somebody's going to, quote mine that. Yeah. Like, here goes that was a perfect gospel presentation, but believed it. So if you're watching this, we could know the gospel, we could believe the gospel, and get to the point where we look back at it and say, oh, it's just not true.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, volumes 1 and 2. Pick that up. I started reading that when I was doing my research for my book, and I didn't know how deep the rabbit hole actually went.
Yeah.
And I started going through it like, yo, there's a part of me, the Bible nerd in me was like, yo, this is just fascinating to know this much history about this Bible story. I didn't know that there was this much outside knowledge about this particular part of history. So even the Bible nerd in you, listener, a viewer, like there are things in it that just will enrich your appreciation for, oh, that was a real period in history. What was going on? And then you kind of have to wrestle with, well, then what do I do now with what the Bible is saying about that period?
Yeah.
It's a great resource. I think, like Josh said, for either, no matter where you are, it's a great resource.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate your story, what you're doing. I'm going to I'm going to put the information so that they can go check out Digital Hammurabi. What else do they need to check out so that they can keep tabs on Dr. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, if any new book that comes out, if they just search on Amazon Joshua Bowen, I think there are 5 up there now. Yeah.
Are you active on Twitter, on TikTok?
Yeah, I am. I'm not on TikTok. I mean, I sort of am on TikTok. I have a not Kent Hovind account. That's what it is, at not Kent Hovind.
So wait, so those who don't know, Dr. Josh has one of the best, most hilarious Kent Hovind impersonations.
Let me tell you this, Brady, because I see you here as somebody who is a former Christian, but I think you're really in this because you just want to go smoke those drugs, okay? So I think that's and to have that sex. So I think that's what's going on here because certainly you wouldn't you probably believe that evolution, don't you? Okay? Yeah. So of course we know that Earth was created in 6 literal days, and of course we know that evolution is just dumb. We shouldn't have taxpayers paying for it. Okay, no, I'm here to help. Sorry, everyone.
Help us. So
yes.
wait,
help
you
us.
actually have a TikTok page dedicated to not Kent Hovind.
I have a not Kent Hovind rap that I do.
Oh wow.
Which maybe that's just turned everybody off from looking at it, which maybe is not a bad thing. Maybe it's not a bad thing. You don't want to see me rapping.
You deconverted in what year?
2009.
So I'm a little offended because you were a Christian rap listener. You listened to T-Bone. You listened to KJ52, Gospel Gangsters.
Yep. SS Mob.
SS Mob. But when I reached out to you, had not heard of Cross Movement.
I know.
We were active from 1995 to 2008.
It's weird because so that you don't feel as bad. I went to, it would have been in 2008, maybe 7. I don't remember. It was in San Diego. It was called, oh boy, it's a big Christian
Creation?
concept. No. Spirit West Coast. That's what it was called. Okay. Spirit West Coast. And I had been, I'd been listening to all kinds of Christian music at that point, but apparently just very specific bands or groups, because I got out there and there were these bands that I just had no idea existed. So I do apologize though, because I did feel bad when we got when we got off the phone. I was like, oh, such an ass. But no, I grew up with DC Talk.
Wow.
So I don't even think that factors into this discussion, honestly.
Well, Note of Herbs does, and Grits. If you were listening to Grits, I don't know if you're familiar with Grits. So DC Talk introduced Grits. They were like a Christian rap band on Goatee Records.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like that sounds familiar, but like, what was the name of the the album that I listened to on repeat nonstop. I could sing all the songs to you, but I remember the album name. But yeah, but then I like T-Bone, The Redeemed Hoodlum. That was my thing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway,
All right.
fun times.
Yeah, good stuff. Hey, thank you for your time.
Of course.
And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, I'm sure the comments are going to be rich. And if life allows, I'd love to have you back on.
I'd love to. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. We'll go ahead and end it there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brady.